I'm Joshua Lax, fountain pen user, collector,
A bit like all of Andrew's, right?
and all-around fanatic. In fact, I'm so obsessed, I started a business where I get to work with other people's pens. But now I want to show you everything I love about the world of fountain pens. From the new pens, to the old pens, the nibs, the ink, the paper, and especially the people. This is Uncapped. This episode is about the Endless Phantom, which you see right in front of you. It's a pen I got a few weeks ago. It came while I was away for the DC Pen Show, and I got it through a Kickstarter that was run earlier this year or last year, and it seemed like an interesting pen. As you can see, it's branded Endless. Endless is a company from India. I had previously gotten this pen, not from Kickstarter, but probably from Colt Pens or something like that, and I rather liked it. These are not the best pens. We'll talk about that in a second, but I was curious about this pen because it is a capless fountain pen. The other thing with it is that it was offered with these special stacked nibs that were an add-on to the Kickstarter, and that's really going to be the heart of today's video because there's some issues with them and I want to work through them with you and see if we can fix them. So let me give you a little bit more about this pen and the Kickstarter, and then we'll get into the nib issues and what we might do about them. All right, as I said, this was a Kickstarter. When I got the box, it was marked for Kickstarter. The box has this really cool embossing on it, and it's marked Endless Phantom. There's some instructions in the box, but it has a unique pen ID, so I'm a little reluctant to show it to all of you because I don't really know what's going to happen. But they have this little illustration here with the anatomy of the pen. So basically, this is the pen disassembled. And one other thing, I mentioned this a moment ago, is I got a replacement nib. So this is actually the original nib that came in this, was inside the pen, and then the replacement nib was in this holder. It's like this really cool little 3D printed thing. I think actually it's one of the coolest things about this whole project. The pen itself, you see, is resting on a cork stand. The cork stand is actually the pen case. So when the pen came, it was in here. Imagine that. This is an extra nib holder. I'll show you that all in a second. So the box tells you can flip it over and use this as a little pen rest, and that is what we'll do for now. Okay. Now, when I got the pen, this was the nib that was in it. So it's a medium, and it is marked an M, and it is, because it was a stealth edition, the nib has got the black plating. Now, interestingly, rather than giving you a whole nib unit that you can just screw in and out, they give you the feed with the nib attached. It fits on kind of like a Parker 51 nib would, where this squeezes on and off. It's on pretty good. I'm not going to mess with that right now. When I got it, for some reason, this nib was sitting like off the feed basically, and I just realigned it and it was fine. And as I said, the nib that's in here, which we're going to talk about in depth, came in this little holder. You basically slide the whole thing in, gently find the little hole for the tail, and then it holds it in place. Kind of a cool little nifty object. All right, let me take apart the pen and just show you what's going on under the hood. So speaking of hood, you see that this is the aperture there. I'm trying to get it in the light. Let's actually look the other way. Yep, there we go. That's the aperture where the pen, where the nib is going to come out. So if you press the clicker here, or the knock, whatever you want to call it, out comes the nib. Now, I've noticed, and it's going to be hard for me to show you, there's basically, the inside of this is not a door so much as some sort of curtain. So when you push the nib forward, it comes out of that curtain. Let's see if we can get that. You don't really see it. Unlike some of the other capless pens that are out there, it has its own sort of proprietary design of how this all fits together, proprietary as far as I know. So when I got the pen, it had this nib in it, the black plated nib. And as you can see, there's like a, I think this is the Endless logo there, and then the M for medium printed on the top of the nib. And the way it worked is that M and logo line coordinated with that little arrow there. So you knew that it was fitting all together. And when I got my pen, actually, that was not the case. So I had to fix it, which was fine. Not a big deal. But in any event, this feed and nib unit inserts into this piece here. And then there's this larger collar holding everything together on this side with the converter. And then on this converter, which is just a slide converter, so not really the most fancy or elaborate converter that's out there on the market. There's this other kind of machine plastic or injection molded plastic piece that I guess holds inside the rear of the pen this in place so it doesn't wobble around so much. So when I got the pen, it had the black nib in it, and I basically just took it out of this holder, or actually I should say I took the stack nib out of the holder and put it into the collar here, and then stored this one for future use or needs if I should have it. Now, I believe this is a single stack, meaning there's one extra layer. I think if it was a double stack, there'd be 2 extra layers to the nib, and that's what attracted me. Now, let me just say, this is not the most expensive pen, and this is not by any sense of the imagination a particularly expensive nib. So I didn't have a lot of expectations for the quality of everything. The pen itself, the body, is pretty much on par with the injection molded plastic I would expect from a pen made in India. It's virtually the same. So if you have this pen, which I forget the name of it, it has this cool little knobby way of filling. It's the identical plastic. It's probably made the same way. The clips are plated. They feel, well, this one's a little more matte, but I mean, in terms of quality, they feel almost identical. So if you have this pen and you like it, or if you have this pen and you have thoughts about it, the build quality is going to be similar to this one. The last thing in terms of the build quality, I just want to note for everybody before we get to that stack nib, is that I noticed in working on this video, and you can kind of see it in the light, the barrel pieces, the top and the bottom, do not mate evenly. And I'm trying to get that on the light, and you can kind of see right there, there's a step, right? So it's not seated even. So either, I think this piece is turned, or I think if it's turned, it's a little off. If it's injection molded plastic, which I think it is, because I can see a seam from that, there's something off with the mold on the bottom and on the top. So I'd be curious, just an informal poll, people who got this pen, if they're finding the same issue with the way that the lower part of the pen is cast versus the upper part of the pen. Just a question for science. The other thing I'll say is I noticed, and I'm going to show you a different angle of this, so if you can't see it at this very moment, don't worry, but basically the nib comes out of this aperture here, and that is not the nib right there, that little dot, that is actually just a reflection of the light. But what happens is when you push the pen, when you push the knock or the clicker up, the nib comes out of the pen. Now, unlike the vanishing point that has a little door, this seems to have more of a curtain system. So I'm trying to get a good view of it, and I don't know if I can. At this angle, I'm going to, again, shoot something separate. You'll see that you can almost see through and into it. So I've had this inked for only a few hours, and we'll get to why we're into a video on it so soon in a second. But the reality of this is that I don't know how well this is going to hold up in terms of dry out, because it seems like whatever's enclosing the nib here is really not sufficient to keep air from coming and going, and thus moisture from coming and going. So we'll see how that goes. But that's just some basic stuff about the pen in case you're curious. It is, a decent size. I'm not going to do a size comparison. Other folks out there have done all of that stuff, so I would commend you to their reviews of this pen. Because what I really want to talk to you all about today is this nib. Now, the true purpose of today's video is to address what you saw in the opening scenes, which is all of this. So what I've been having happen since virtually this pen was, the moment I inked it, this has been the problem. So I start writing, and because it's been left alone, it writes. It writes, and then all of a sudden, nothing. So what I want to talk to you all about today is why that might be happening and if it's at all fixable. But this is obviously not a state of affairs that we can allow to continue. So here we have the nib, and the problem that I'm having with the nib is you start writing with the nib, you squiggle a little bit, you write some letters, and it seems fine, and then all of a sudden the ink is completely depleted. There's nothing flowing. You wait a little bit, maybe a little bit comes out, but it's really just a trickle. And so it's a flow issue or a tip to paper issue, and part of what I want to do here is figure out which it is. Now, the first thing I'll say in terms of problems that leap out to me is the way that this nib sits in terms of the feed. So as you see here, the feed ends here where I'm indicating with the other nib, and then the nib continues past that distance. Now compare that with these, we'll call it the standard issue, right? So I have the medium that comes standard, it's not the upgrade, right? You can just see right away that there's so much more area above this feed on the stack nib than there would be on the other nib, right? There's a lot less area there, but more importantly, there's all of this feed channel. Sorry, let me get that back into focus. There's all of that feed channel up that it has to travel. In addition, there's capillary action inside all of this here. So the ink is being pulled into the stacks, the area between the stacks, and then into the area around the tip. Sorry for that. I'm moving around and it's losing focus, but there we go. So in terms of this nib, it's got the dual challenge now that the feed may not be sitting in the right spot, and we'll check that in a little bit. And you have the dual challenge that just by virtue of how this thing is manufactured, it's going to need a lot of ink to stay wet and flowing. And if the feed is not big enough or it's not keeping the ink at a right rate flowing into the nib, then you're going to get skipping and things like that. However, what I will say is that the problem I just showed you on the screen and in the opening scenes of the episode, that is not skipping. That is full on doesn't write. So we'll need to address this feed in a moment. But before we get to that, let's just talk about the tip for a second. So this tip has several problems, and I'm trying to bring the tip closer and get it to focus. So give me a second. There we go. Oh, nope. It's going to be tough. All right. So the first thing that leapt out to me is, and I don't know if you can see it at this angle, but one side of the tipping is larger than the other. So it's uneven, the tipping. I don't know, you might be able to actually see it better head on. If you look at this, you can see that the amount of tipping on the right side of the nib in the view we have right here is actually, I believe, a different shape and perhaps wider than the tipping on the other side. So that sticks out a little bit. Let me just angle it. Sorry again. The other thing is if you look at the inside of the tines there, or inside of the tip, you can see that it's a little uneven and a little jagged. And, when I've written on this with the paper, like for the sample that you've seen now twice, you can kind of see that or I don't know if you can hear it, it struggles against the paper. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is just how it's shaped. Now I'm looking at it from sort of an angled and going upward type view, even though the pen is kind of resting back, but you can kind of see from the angle I have it that there is also like that jagged edge right there, and you can see that like one side is kind of almost jagged into the other. You see that sometimes. That's like a finishing problem. So there's multiple things that could be causing this problem, but I think that the first step to dealing with this in terms of getting the flow right, at least, is to actually take apart that nib unit, as messy as it's going to be, and see what's going on with the feed and if we can seat it any differently. All right, I have taken apart the nib unit. As you can see, I really took it apart and it sprayed everywhere, but it's okay. It's for science. I'm not really worried. And what I'm seeing here does not give me much hope in terms of fixing this by reseating it, because what I'm noticing is that this is all keyed to the feed. So there's a little cutout in the base of the nib right there, and the feed goes into that, and then the feed is resting against a little step, the nib is resting in a little step down against the feed right over there. So in terms of being able to put this on deeper or getting it deeper onto the feed, that looks like that is a non-starter. So let me put this back in and let it get inky again. There we go, we got it right. Nope, I got it totally wrong. All right, I'll be back. I need to wipe up and get things reassembled. So I have the pen back together after that experiment with the nib, and just in case anyone's wondering, what's all over me and what's in the pen is Diamine Royal Blue. Seemed like a nice gentle blue. Hopefully it will wash out, or I have a new roll in the Blue Man group coming my way. Anyway, let's talk about how we can try and tune the nib to maybe actually write. I am actually, as I reflect on this, like a little bit perturbed that things got to this design, because if it never works, I'm kind of like, well, are they selling a nib that doesn't work? So I'd be curious if anyone got one of these that writes beautifully, and maybe I just need to talk to the company. In any event, let's discuss what we're going to do. So first of all, I have, as I have advised everyone to do before, brought my loop with me, and I'm just going to take a quick look at the nib and see what's the best way to attack it. And I think for my own sanity, the best thing to do is to try and sand out some of the material inside the tines to make it flow a little better, remove those jagged edges, and deal with that problem. So I'm going to attempt to do this on camera, but I'll caution you that I may have to go off camera because I just need to see better what I'm doing rather than filming my hands. But I will try and do it via television as much as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the tines open. When I can feel it's super scratchy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand on the inside of these tines. Now, I'm not recommending anyone do this to any of their nibs for any one purpose. This is how I'm tackling this problem based on my experience. Okay. So then we have to get the other side because they were equally messed up. And I will say that this is flexing open nicely. I did not expect that to happen. So, and you can hear all of that happening. So what I'm doing is I'm hitting the internal edge of the tines. And I hopefully didn't give it baby's bottom, but we'll see. And already I'm happy to report some mild success. So I just did that off camera. Let me recreate it here. All right. Not perfect yet, but infinitely better. So there was clearly something inside the tines that was inhibiting the flow on this bad boy. All right, let me do one other thing. So I have here my lapping film. This is the green. I think it's the 1 micron, or the 0.01 micron. I'd have to look. In any event, I'm not using it for its polishing. In fact, this is quite abrasive. It looks pretty innocent because it looks similar to micromesh, but trust me when I tell you this thing will polish something way faster than you probably want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use this to floss out the nib and take out any debris that I may have just put in there. And I can see something sticking out. Sorry, I got to do it off camera. But that's the move I'm doing. So I'm spreading the tines again, and I'm just flossing them out, right? So that little bit of schmutz that was protruding is now gone, and I have a flowing nib. But I will tell you, this is not perfect right now. I still feel like it's got too much feedback, so let's address that problem. So the first thing is there a hard edge, which I've talked about on this channel before, up here, and is there a hard edge down here? There is definitely a hard edge over there. So let's see. I have from before. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and smooth out that bottom a little bit and get that little burr that's left there from this. Now notice what I'm doing here, right? I'm not holding the pen stationary and doing it over and over. I'm doing it at a consistent rate while turning the pen, or I should say rotating the pen at a consistent rate. So you can see we have, let's see if that, no, we'll test it. It's a little smoother. That may not be really what's causing me all the discomfort. And I'll also say this is at a pretty high angle. You know, when I do the scribe nibs, I'm doing them like down here for people because that tends to be the typical way people write. If you're a high writer, this will be perfect for you because you get a lot more surface area on the paper when you do that. I already got to start moving this because it's getting a little crowded over there with all the squiggles. Let's just take a few passes at this at the top. See if that makes a difference. Oop. You can hear it here, ready? That's not so bad. But over here, oh yeah, it's catching right there. You know, it's basically feeling the same. So I think what's probably causing me to have a little more discomfort on it is the fact that the face of the nib is a little uneven. So let me work with that for a second. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just try and polish them. Sorry, I'm going to do this off camera for a second just so I have the right dexterity with it. Because I'm just going to see if that makes a difference. I find that sometimes when you touch this paper, you'll get these weird things where like your finger oils prevent you from actually writing with it. All right, let's see. Yeah, not bad. Still a little rough. All right, let's go back to the magnification and see what we got going on and where we've landed so far with what I've done to this nib. All right, so here we have the nib, and if you think back to earlier in the video, you'll see that this, the main slit, kind of that goes up and down the whole height of the nib. So from here down to here, that is wider and a little bit cleaner. There still is, if you look on the left side, a little bit of that jaggedness. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to dig out any more of the space between the tines because I'm looking at it, I don't want to give it baby's bottom. The other thing I'm noticing is that we'll call it, so this will be the right side here, right? And that's the left side if we're looking down at the nib. So if I rotate it, what I'm calling the right side, but is on your left, is slightly larger than the other side of the nib. You can also see the feed is off center. That I'm not sure I could fix that easily right now because that is more or less a problem having to do with the way the feed is manufactured. It's flowing though, so that ended up not being the problem, which was my big concern that I articulated a second ago. So what I'm going to do though is I need to bring down this side of the nib. Okay, I'm back. So what did I do off camera that I think has really turned this all around? So what I did was I basically sanded the sides down a little bit to try and even them out. And you can see there they're not exactly even, but the face that, or the surface that's actually hitting the paper is more even now. And then you can kind of see there that it's a little bit deceiving because I sort of angled off and took down some of the material on the side, which you wouldn't necessarily get if you looked at it this angle. The other thing I did was I smoothed the face of this because I noticed that was a little bit uneven. And then I kind of went on one after the top and the bottom of this nib to really smooth the edges that you see kind of at the corner. And you can see that they're a lot more rounded at this point. And then at some point I put it on the 12,000 wet dry sand, not wet dry, the 12,000 grit micro mesh to just give everything a little bit of a polish. And I flossed out with the lapping film. So that's what I did. It's writing much better now. So let's do a new writing sample to see where we're at. So I have the endless paper back, and let's just do a test on it. So I'm just gonna write some letters rather than something squiggly. So I think it's probably coming through that there is still some noise coming, but I would say to all of you that this is one, kind of a grainy paper, and two, it's writing much better than it did. So it has a little bit of feedback. I think, with 4 different tine pieces, you can expect that there's little places it's always going to catch, and it's never going to be buttery smooth unless I were to actually grind this down and reshape it completely, which I don't want to do. That's not the point of what this video is. But on this paper, it feels pretty good. Now, this is a grainier paper, as I said. Let's actually try a different paper. So we have here my Tomoe paper pad that you've seen on the channel before. Obviously a little more of a smooth paper. Move that over, and let's just give this a try. I mean, that is pretty smooth. Again, you get a little bit of feedback and you get a little bit of noise just from the friction. But, I mean, it is 100% fun to use. And I would say that, it's a little unforgiving with the angle. So if it catches because you're doing it in a weird way, right there is really great. If you go up a little bit, you start to feel some of the edge. So I'm not really a big user of stack nibs, so I don't know all the ins and outs of using them, whether you always look for a sweet spot. I imagine you would, just because it's part of how they're made. There's usually a giant flat surface, as there is here. So what are my reflections on this pen and on this nib? The pen, is fine. It's an interesting, clicky, capless fountain pen. So it's been about 3 days since I filmed the bulk of this episode. And what happened was the morning after, I woke up and decided to see if the pen wrote. So I took the pen, I clicked it out, and I got nothing, much like you see here. I kept playing with it a little bit, and then I tapped it a bunch of times. You see all these little dots on the page, and that got the ink flowing. Let's see if it works this time. No, not coming. Basically, every day I've done the test you just saw. So I left it overnight. I came back. I scribbled with it. It was writing dry, or not writing at all, I should say. And then I kept playing with it until ink started to flow again. And as you can see here in all these squiggles, at times the flow was quite generous. Let's have a look at the converter to see what's going on as well. So you can see the converter is running down. I'm not sure if that is ink dry out, or that is just the fact that this thing puts down a boatload of ink because it's such a big tip. So as a consequence, I don't really know if this thing is drying out or something else is going on. So let me talk to you about some of the realm of possibility of what's happening here. So first of all, when I looked at it, and I don't think you're going to be able to see it here, but I can see it from my point of view, there is no ink in the slit in the tine, okay? You can see a little ink has collected kind of where that seam is for the upper layer. And when you touch kind of the top where the breather hole is and things, usually if the ink is flowing, you will get ink on your finger. And you can see when I touch over here, ink gets on my finger, but when you touch on the breather hole over here, it's dry. So this nib is drying out, and I'm unsure why it's happening in terms of it going backwards, right? So it's weird to me that ink is not drying in the space between the tines. So one possibility is that there's something funky with the feed or something, and it's going back in. Now, I did check the taper in the space between the tines and the slit. So what should happen is that it should taper towards the point like this. If it's like this, ink goes backwards, but it would still fill in a place where there's proper capillary action. Here I checked and there is a taper, so that doesn't explain why it's not writing. The biggest thing I've noticed, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about, is that in this opening here, and I'm going to put up on the screen a close-up of this so you can see what I'm talking about. There are these two, and I think I called them earlier curtains. They're like little rubber curtains. And when you push the nib forward, it comes out between those curtains. But when you retract the nib, this nib sits in the opening. So the nib tip is actually exposed to open air. It's not being retracted all the way into the pen, and thus that could be the cause of this drying out. So there's a number of different problems that could be causing this, and I'm not sure which one it is. Let's see if me futzing with this has got the flow back. So see, me playing with this has got the ink flowing all again, but there it's running out. So there's some problem with this nib, and then there's some problem with this nib versus the pen. So what's the upshot of everything I'm telling you? You know, I was jazzed about this pen. I like the design of it. It wasn't particularly expensive, and I knew it was likely going to be this type of plastic. Like, I had all expectations that I was not looking at like a super bargain in terms you were going to get this amazing pen at this amazing price. I knew what I was getting into. Likewise with the nib, I knew what I was getting into with this nib. I expected it to have trouble writing because I know people that make stacked nibs, and the people who make stacked nibs put an immense amount of time and effort into doing it, and they work very hard to get it right. So the idea that I was going to be able to buy a $35 stacked nib, I knew was probably too good to be true. So all of those things, I came into this eyes wide open and was prepared for a myriad of issues to come up with this pen. What I was not prepared for was that they would sell an upgrade to a pen that is almost the price of the whole pen. I think the pen was like $40 or $50, and then they were selling the nib for $35. So, you know, it's somewhere like a 75% upcharge for this nib. But then to have an upgrade like that doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't work. And to go to market with something that the parts don't fit together, again, if it may not be the greatest pen, but like there's certain bare minimum things you need to do to make sure a pen is writing. So from all of that, I would say to you all, you know, if you have the standard nib, maybe this works better. The fact that like this whole assembly in the front doesn't fit together is like a super problem. And for me, I would say, you know, they got to go back to the drawing board and work all this out if they're going to keep going with this model and the features they're offering. I think there's another nib that's like a Architect. There may be like a Fude. All of those I'm skeptical are going to fit into this. The other thing I would say to you all is if you're interested in this nib, you don't necessarily have to get it from, unless I went on AliExpress in the intervening time and looked through, and I found that you can buy this exact nib separate and loose from any sort of feed from 365 Day Stationery. So, and I don't know with tariffs and everything how the price equates. It looked like it was maybe $38 or $32 all said and done to be shipped to me in New Jersey. But, you know, ultimately, This pen has a lot of problems, especially when you incorporate the upgrade. And for me, that is not really acceptable. Again, I like their paper. I like their previous pen. I was happy to take a chance on this, but I just want people to know that although I was able to fix the nib, ultimately it was a Pyrrhic victory because, every day I pick it up and it's not going to start writing. And when you're in the realm of a capless, clicky fountain pen, the whole notion of it is you just click it open and start writing. And obviously, that is not what we're getting here. So for all those reasons, I would tell you at the moment in this generation, the Endless Phantom is no bueno. Hopefully they get it together and come out with something better. I have faith in them. Again, I really like their paper, always have, but this pen just doesn't cut it. So that is the Endless Phantom for you all with the stack nib upgrade. I hope that this episode has been somewhat informative. I don't like to be negative, but I need to be truthful with you all. And here we are. I look forward to sharing with you more of my pen adventures. I have I want to talk a little bit about ink and journaling coming up, so look out for that. Those are going to be a little bit more like a vlog situation rather than like a at the workbench type thing. So I look forward to sharing all of that with you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.